Hi, my name is Sheila Corona. Welcome to New Light Streaming Love and Sassy Seer Sheila, as this will be seen on both channels. This is how stuff works for me. Okay, so yesterday, day before, it was yesterday in the morning, I saw an article on my sister's Facebook page that spoke to me. And I knew the moment I began to share it out loud with Lisa and her mom that I was to record this. Well, things started happening here at the house, and the day got away from me. I didn't actually get to finish reading it to either one of them or to myself. And it had gone completely out of my mind that I was to record this piece. And then I awoke, or was it? Yeah, this was on Saturday, this came in. I awoke yesterday morning, actually, to find that Amber Fields, who is the young lady that is also recording Jason's work, whom I have only met once in Zoom, and we are planning to have a conscious conversation together at some point, saw this article and actually sent it to me in private message and said, I know I don't know you very well, but I have a sense that I was nudged to send this to you. I have a sense that this would apply to you and I both. And I thought, as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, okay, I got it. I'm to record this and share it. And so and honestly, it could only be because it does apply to me, and I have to hear it in my own voice. That happens all the time to me. So this may not at all have anything to do with you personally. However, if you've been drawn here, there is a reason for that. Now, I will also say I tried to find the creator of this piece, and in the Facebook post that my sister posted, which was a totally different person, by the way, than Amber found it from, says that this was via, what was the name of it? Oh, Surreal Minds, which I did find is a YouTube channel. And I did see that there is a video that apparently reads this text. But it sounded to me as though it was AI, and nothing wrong with that as far as I'm concerned. However, I just know that I'm to record it in my voice. So I did not listen to it. But to give that channel credit, I will be sharing the link to that particular video in the show more section. And I will say that somebody by the name of Caravaggio Bolo is the one that my friend, and actually somebody else, Lizzie Bluebell, they are both publicly available on Facebook. So if you feel led to look into these beings, please do by all means. Because Lizzie says, great article, explains much. When one sees clearly what others cannot or will refuse to see, one becomes a mirror that society cannot bear to look into. And quite frankly, I've had this experience quite a lot in my life, and it explains so much. So it begins. Jung, and this is referring to Carl G. Jung, the famous psychologist, whom in my book, which is another synchronicity, my book group is reading this book right now together. And so just another huge synchronicity for me that I cannot unsee. And so Jung's most dangerous discovery wasn't about mental illness. It was about people who see everything others miss and why this ability destroys them. In his clinical practice, Jung documented patients with what he called, quote, differentiated perception. And this may actually go to why I see, sense, and feel that each one of us, as we exist in our physical vessels, are a window for which the divine creativity it has access to this reality, and why that window is absolutely that perception, that window is completely unique to the vessel who is viewing it based on all their own experiences. It forms and informs and colors the perspectives that are held in everything. And I feel like that's true of all beings, not just those with differentiated perception. Individuals who could read micro expressions, sense hidden emotions, and perceive psychological patterns that escaped everyone else. They saw through social masks, detected lies instantly, and felt the unconscious tensions in every room. Jung called this discovery, quote, dangerous because these people consistently ended up isolated, exhausted, and unable to maintain normal relationships. And I know for me, I have asked myself, what is wrong with me all my life? Why is it that this and that and the other consistently happens for me? And why isn't this being seen over here? It's so clear to me, right? All my life I had that. Not because they were unstable, but because seeing everything came with a psychological cost no one understood. Today, I'll show you Jung's most dangerous discovery about people who see everything and why he believed this rare ability either destroys you or transforms you into something extraordinary. The case that revealed Jung's most dangerous discovery began with a patient he described in his private notes. A highly introverted intuitive type. It was at this point right here I stopped reading because something took place. And I also questioned myself. I don't really feel like an introvert. However, the Briggs Meyer did only show me as 56% extroverted. So that's kind of interesting. I always felt myself as more extroverted, more outgoing than introverted. But again, since I tried not to read this and it came to me yet and again, I have to. So, a highly introverted intuitive type who came to him in 1913 during Jung's own psychological crisis following his break with Freud. This patient, presenting what Jung would later categorize as the rarest personality type, possessed what he called, quote, undifferentiated intuitive perception. She could walk into any room and immediately sense the psychological atmosphere, who was lying and who was in emotional pain, who harbored secret resentments. Jung wrote, quote, the patient displays an extraordinary capacity for perceiving unconscious contents in others, but this faculty appears to cause her considerable distress rather than advantage. She couldn't engage in small talk because she saw through every social facade. She couldn't maintain friendships because people felt exposed and uncomfortable around her. Now, I want to pause here and say that what I've learned over the last several years of trying to look into me, one of the things that I found was called human design. And in human design, this is a puzzle piece. Now I'm showing you how my little puzzle piece works. In human design, those that are considered projectors, which I am, make up about 20% of the population and are exactly this kind of thing. He actually used the words in one of his lectures that a being who is in the presence of a projector feels as though they are being watched, that they are being singled out, that they are in some way being known or seen in a very uncomfortable way, like there's a camera eye on them from the projector, and that the projector often doesn't even realize that. Well, I never really knew that. I thought everybody had the same abilities I did, right? And this has to do with perception and nothing more. And when you don't really understand what it is that you have going on, so this is very interesting to me that it's more like describing the feeling that projectors obviously just their aura pulls back data according to the man who created that way of differentiating different experiences or energies on the planet. So I'll just repeat this part here. She couldn't maintain friendships because people felt exposed and uncomfortable around her. She couldn't hold employment because her presence disrupted the collective unconscious agreements that keep groups functioning. Jung realized he wasn't treating pathology. He was observing what happens when the unconscious becomes too conscious, when perception becomes too differentiated for social survival. He documented her describing people with startling accuracy. She speaks of others as if she has access to their private thoughts and hidden motivations. When I verify her observations through careful questioning, they prove remarkably accurate. This wasn't psychosis or delusion. This was consciousness so advanced it had become socially dangerous. But Jung discovered something even more disturbing. Oh, great. Because this patient's extraordinary perception seemed impossible to explain, therefore, Jung began investigating what he would later term, quote, participation mystique, the psychological phenomenon where individuals with highly differentiated intuition become overwhelmed by unconscious content from others. Jung wrote in his Red Book period notes, there are those among us whose psychic apparatus is so finely attuned that they absorb not merely conscious communications, but the entire unconscious atmosphere of their environment. That became known to me not that long ago. I didn't realize that that's something that obviously was happening because I was beginning to see that there were things going on around me that had nothing to do with me, but yet I was feeling them within me so much. It was hard for me to differentiate my own stuff from others' stuff. And sometimes it still is. And I'm 63. Can you imagine this with a child? Just think about and feel into that for a moment. And there are as it was with me, because I remember being told that you don't know that. Stop saying that. That's not true. You don't see that. You can't possibly know, just stuff like that. Being punished for stuff I didn't understand. Yeah. Uh, Modern research by Dr. Elaine Aron on highly sensitive persons validates Jung's early observations. Her research shows that roughly 20% of people have heightened sensory and emotional sensitivity. Now, that sounds like they're describing what is known in the human design as projectors. But Jung identified something more specific within his psychological typology. The introverted intuitive type, comprising roughly 1% of the population, who doesn't just feel deeply, but perceive unconscious patterns with startling clarity. Jung observed that these individuals have what he called differentiated intuitive function. Their brains process not just obvious social cues, but unconscious emotional states, repressed content, and psychological patterns that others cannot detect. They see the depression behind forced smiles, and I have done that. They sense the desperation beneath confident presentations. They feel the collective shadow that groups unconsciously agree to ignore. Jung wrote, quote, "The danger lies not in the perception itself, but in the psychic isolation it creates." That could be partly why I always feel so lonesome sometimes, because it is very isolating. Because just being in my presence is not easy on people. I know, I'm aware of that now. And it does make it a little easier for me to understand that, but it doesn't make it any less lonesome because folks don't want to see all of themselves. And because I do want to see all of me, that puts it out there even more, if that makes any sense. When one sees clearly what others cannot or will not see, one becomes a mirror that society cannot bear to look into. This creates what Jung called, quote, "the problem of the superior function," end quote, when your greatest strength becomes your greatest burden because it separates you from collective unconscious participation. But Jung discovered the real danger wasn't the perception itself. Jung wrote in Psychology of the Unconscious, "Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent." I really do feel like that's true. I'm watching I'm watching some stuff go on with my child right now that I know I am the direct cause of, that unlived life that I didn't allow myself to experience for various and sundry reasons. And I'm seeing how that is affecting him. He would never agree with my statement on that, but I can see it very clearly. Again, it's one of those things, right? And honestly, I can see the unlived life of my parent as well. I could see that when she was still alive, and she was very vocal about her unlived life. Yeah. But he discovered this principle extended to all relationships. When someone's shadow is reflected back through another person's clear perception, the unconscious mind has two choices: integrate the shadow or attack the mirror. Jung documented this pattern repeatedly in his clinical work. The person who sees clearly gets blamed for creating the problem. They're merely observing. His patients with differentiated intuition experience this constantly. Yep. When they would gently suggest that someone seemed troubled, that person would explode at them for being negative or creating drama. When they'd express concern about obvious problems, they'd be accused of being judgmental or manufacturing issues where none existed. Young, I had that so much as a young one when I didn't really understand what it was I was saying. I just thought I was stating the obvious that everybody could see. That's really hard on a little tiny kid. Trust me. Jung realized this wasn't coincidence. It was psychological defense. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Absolutely true that. At least that's been my experience so far. Um, But for most people, it's easier to attack the person reflecting their shadow than it is to examine what's being reflected. This creates what Jung called the scapegoat phenomenon. Highly perceptive individuals often become the designated problem in every group they enter, not because they reveal, not because they cause problems, but because they reveal problems that already exist in the collective unconscious. Jung observed the bearer of superior perception becomes the repository for all that the group cannot consciously acknowledge about itself. And even when one learns to keep one's mouth shut, the the frequency, the energy of being seen is felt. That's what I know now with all of me. This pattern explains why these individuals don't just feel misunderstood. They feel systematically targeted by a force they cannot rationally explain. But Jung's most disturbing discovery was still to come, because Jung observed that overwhelming perception manifested differently in different individuals. Therefore, he identified four distinct patterns within the introverted intuitive type, each representing a different way of processing unconscious content from others. Jung wrote, "The feeling intuitive lives in a state of perpetual emotional contagion, experiencing the unlived emotions of everyone in their environment." Type 2, the thinking intuitive. These individuals see psychological patterns and predict behavioral outcomes with startling accuracy. Jung observed they could forecast relationship failures, career disasters, and personal breakdowns months before they occurred, not through logical analysis, but through unconscious pattern recognition. Jung noted they possess an uncanny ability to perceive the logical conclusions of unconscious processes that others cannot yet see. Type 3, the sensation intuitive. Jung documented patients who could sense the physical manifestations of psychological states in others. detecting illness before symptoms appeared, sensing fatigue before it was acknowledged, or feeling the bodily tension that indicated emotional distress. Jung wrote, these individuals serve as early warning systems for psychological and physical dis-ease in their environment. Type 4, the pure intuitive, the rarest type. Jung encountered a combined introverted intuition with what he called undifferentiated auxiliary function. They saw everything, but had difficulty organizing or expressing their perceptions coherently. Jung observed they live in a state of perpetual overwhelm, receiving vast amounts of unconscious information without adequate psychological structure to process it constructively. Understanding your specific pattern is crucial because each type requires different approaches to what Jung called the integration challenge. But first, as I was reading that last one, I wanted to share with you all that I was being flashed my time of illness where I really was at death's door for more than 10 years. And I was being treated with all manner of psychological drugs as well as pain drugs. And I was mostly not even here. And I have to wonder if I'm being flashed that because I didn't have the wherewithal to process the collective unconscious. And during those years, there was an awful lot going on the planet on the whole. And that is right at the moment that I started being made aware of the corruption on the planet. And so I wonder if that's partly why I was flashed that. Interesting. But first, you need to understand why Jung considered this discovery so dangerous. Because Jung observed the devastating effects of undifferentiated perception on his patients. Therefore, he concluded that seeing everything without proper psychological integration posed genuine dangers to both individual and collective well-being. I could see where that would be absolutely correct. Jung identified 3 specific dangers that made this discovery so threatening. Danger 1, collective unconscious disruption. Jung wrote, the individual who perceives too clearly threatens the collective agreements upon which social cohesion depends. When someone sees through the shared illusions that hold groups together, the unspoken agreements to ignore certain truths, they become a destabilizing force. Jung observed that organizations, families, and societies function partly through collective unconscious agreements about what will and what won't be acknowledged. Now, think about what's going on the planet right now and how so many of those folks we think won't wake up or whatever. Those are all social agreements that they have unconsciously agreed on some level because we too, those of us who feel like we've woken up from that, we too were part of that agreement at one point in our journey, right? So this makes a lot of sense. It is, and when one first starts waking up to the truth of what's been going on this planet, it is a very destabilizing thing. There are actually, in my view, the five steps of grief are very close to the same steps for awakening. You go through all these different things, and I found myself going back and forth between them quite heavily as I was doing that waking up process. Yeah, the highly perceptive individual inadvertently violates uh, these agreements simply by existing authentically. Danger two, psychological isolation. Jung documented how differentiated perception creates what he called, quote, the problem of superior function, when your greatest psychological strength becomes the source of your greatest suffering. He wrote, the curse of consciousness is that it cannot be shared with those who do not possess it. Ain't that the truth? I mean, any one of us that are in those differing states of what has been called awakening can attest to the fact that those who cannot or will not and are not interested in uh, looking at any of that sort of thing, there's no amount of anything one could say or do. Trust me, I know. Ask me how I know, and I will tell you. Yeah, no, that's so true. The individual becomes an island of awareness in an ocean of unconsciousness. This isolation isn't just social, it's existential. These individuals often report feeling like they're living in a different reality from everyone around them. And boy, oh boy, that is so true. And I already know that many of you that follow me, this channel, and my journey, you have very much similar feelings to this. Um, Danger number three, identity dissolution. Most dangerously, Jung found that people who absorb unconscious contents from others often lose contact with their own authentic personality. Well, I don't know about that myself. I actually feel as though with every bit I now learn, I'm really more in touch with the inner part of me. Now, I don't know. I'm sure that it could be, well, you know what? Had some of the beings that I have now the pleasure of being in my circle hadn't come along, I think that could very well apply to me. But I do have Lisa, and I do have Crystal, and I have many of you that have been reaching out and becoming more a part of that circle of friends that gather in Zoom and support each other. And it's not as isolating once you know there are others who are in that state of awareness. And the words becoming is what just came in my head for that. They become so flooded with external psychological material that they can't distinguish between their own inner world and what they are absorbing from their environment. Jung called this quote, participation mystique, a state where psychological boundaries dissolve and the individual becomes merged with collective unconscious contents. He wrote, the danger is not merely social exile, but psychological annihilation, the complete loss of individual identity in favor of collective possession. This is why Jung considered the integration of superior perception not just therapeutically important, but psychologically urgent, because unintegrated superior perception posed such dangers. Therefore, Jung developed what he called the individuation process, a systematic approach to maintaining individual identity while developing unconscious relationships with, no, develop, while developing conscious relationships with unconscious content. Well, see, that's why I feel like it's important to have those who are in varying stages of awakening in touch with each other to be those touchstones, to provide those relationships that will assist rather than take advantage of. Because as one is in the midst of that, it would be very easy to take advantage of that person and steer them, right? Um, at least in my way of looking at it. Um, if they're not conscious enough and confident enough in their own inner, which at first can happen. That's why having someone who is and can see that, I don't know, this is very interesting to me, this whole thing here. So because unintegrated superior perception posed such dangers, therefore Jung developed what he called the individuation process, a systematic approach to maintaining individual identity while developing conscious relationship with unconscious content. Phase 1, recognition and differentiation. Jung taught his highly perceptive patients to first recognize when they were absorbing psychological material that wasn't their own. Oh, yes, that's very important, I would say. And not an easy thing to do, which is good to have other touchstones that you can speak to in regards to all of that. For me, anyway, it has been. He called this, quote, conscious discrimination, the ability to distinguish between authentic inner experience and unconsciously absorbed external content. Well, that's something that Lisa Flamino Rush has really assisted me with when she's helped me figure out how to recognize the difference between my inner voice and something else, whether it be my ego or somebody else's ego or, whatever, right? That's a very important thing. So I would imagine, yes, he called, yeah, conscious discrimination, the ability to distinguish between authentic inner experience and unconsciously absorbed external content. Jung wrote, quote, the first task is to establish what belongs to you and what belongs to others. Without this discrimination, there can be no individual development. Technique. Jung instructed patients to spend time in complete solitude daily, allowing absorbed material to settle so they could recognize their own authentic psychological voice. That is very true and real. And again, puzzle piece alert, the fellow who developed the human design talked about the projector should not sleep with other energy types in their field, any energy type in their field, because of the absorption of the thoughts, the feeling, the consciousness of that other person that happens during sleep, even because that data is always emitting in the field. So it is. And see, I was never one to spend any time alone. But I now see where this is absolutely imperative, especially as an emotional projector. I have to be able to sort out what is mine and what is not mine. and I'm saying this out loud right now because even so, this was something that Crystal and I talked about last night during the reading that she did with me about me spending time with me in a different way. Um, yeah, instructing patients to spend time in complete solitude daily, allowing absorbed material to settle so they could recognize their own authentic psychological voice. Phase 2, shadow integration. Jung discovered that people who see others' shadows clearly often do so because they haven't integrated their own. I know that's true. The more you deny your own capacity for deception, selfishness, or cruelty, the more disturbed you will be by seeing these qualities in others. Oh, so true. Jung wrote, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. That's why I really welcome triggers in these moments of now, because it's showing me something. It is my alert system that something is not right in Denmark over here. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, but only if we have the courage to look inward rather than remaining focused outward. The shadow integration means acknowledging that you contain every human quality you observe in others. This doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a complete person who can see clearly without judgment. This is true. There's been such a huge thing about negativity and all of that and darkness and we don't go there, you know, that that is so not the truth of it. Phase 3, conscious participation. The final phase involves what Jung called conscious participation in the collective unconscious. The ability to engage with others' psychological contents without being overwhelmed or losing your individual identity. Now, I've gotten a whole lot better about that than I was for all those years I was ill. Mostly because all those years I was ill, I was running from my own shadow as well as the collective, right? So, I mean, and I can very clearly see that. I have admitted that in more ways than one, that that is what I was doing there when I was so ill, running from myself in a huge way. And a lot of people are, and that's okay. They will see it when they're ready to see it and not a moment before. And there's nothing any of us can actually do to assist them except send love and know that when the time is right for them, it will happen. So, the ability to engage with others' psychological content without being overwhelmed or losing your individual identity. Jung wrote, the individuated person can serve as a bridge between conscious and unconscious, helping to make the unconscious conscious in others without sacrificing their own psychological integrity. And I would say that, yes, and for me personally, there's only been a few relationships that I haven't where clearly, like I was sharing yesterday, this between my child and myself, there was some things I was not seeing of my own, right? But other than that, I really feel, I hope, but at least because I'm open to being shown my own and I want to see it, I will be shown it and I will see it when it's time. This requires developing what Jung called psychological containers, the ability to hold others' unconscious contents temporarily while maintaining awareness that they are not your own. Because Jung understood that superior perception either destroys or transforms. Destroys or transforms. I lost my place. I'm sorry. Individuals. Therefore, he studied historical figures to understand the difference between successful integration and psychological breakdown. The case of Nietzsche, unintegrated perception. Jung was deeply influenced by Nietzsche's philosophy, but observed how his superior perception ultimately led to psychological collapse. In, quote, Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, Jung wrote about Nietzsche's ability to see through social, religious, and philosophical facades with devastating clarity. However, Jung noted that Nietzsche never learned to integrate these insights constructively. Instead of using his perception in service of healing, he wielded it as a weapon against society. Jung wrote, Nietzsche possessed an extraordinary insight into human nature, but he remained identified with his superior function rather than integrating it into a balanced personality. Jung observed, and that is something that I could see happening absolutely. I it has been said of me that I have big energy, and if it was not in balance, it would be a force, and it has been at times a force to be reckoned with. Right, a huge force to be reckoned with, and so I see what he means here by this. Jung observed that Nietzsche's isolation and eventual breakdown represented what happens when superior perception remains unintegrated. The individual becomes consumed by what they see rather than transformed by it. The case of Meister Eckhart, successful integration. Jung extensively studied the medieval mystic Meister Eckhart, whom he considered an example of successfully integrated superior perception. Eckhart possessed what Jung called, quote, mystical intuition, the ability to perceive spiritual and psychological realities that others could not access. But unlike Nietzsche, Eckhart channeled his insights into compassionate service. Jung wrote, Eckhart transformed his superior perception into wisdom that could nourish others without overwhelming them. He saw clearly, but spoke in ways that invited understanding rather than resistance. Jung noted that Eckhart's success came from what he called conscious humility. The recognition that superior perception is a gift to be shared wisely, not a weapon to be wielded. Jung's own integration journey. Most significantly, Jung documented his own struggle with overwhelming perception during what he called his confrontation with the unconscious from 1913 to 1919, recorded in the Red Book. Jung wrote, I was menaced by a psychosis, and I was saved only by my ability to understand what was happening to me through my work with patients. His superior perception of unconscious contents, both his own and others, nearly destroyed him until he learned to integrate these experiences consciously. And that's really what wanting to see all of me, I now recognize, is about. Learning how to integrate these experiences consciously and Sheila, please hear this, not being so hard on myself as I recognize those things and integrate them. Because that in and of itself is something that I have not always learned how to do. Jung's breakthrough came when Jung's breakthrough came when he realized that his overwhelming perceptions weren't pathological, but evolutionary. Yeah, I feel like they are. They represented consciousness attempting to evolve beyond current collective limitations. Yes, this realization transformed his approach to patients with similar gifts because individuals with superior perception often face isolation. Therefore, Jung emphasized the crucial importance of finding what he called the few who understand. Dun, 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 the whole reason Conscious Conversation Central was born. I'm not going to lie. I now see that on so many levels. Lisa and I knew there had to be more. And if it is indeed evolutionary, which I feel it is, that means it will just happen more and more and more and more and more, because I feel like that's what we are moving towards in the entire human race, not just a select few. This is not a projector. In the human design, she is considered a manifesting generator. Others capable of engaging with differentiated consciousness without defensiveness. Jung wrote in The Development of Personality, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This privilege cannot be realized in isolation. No, that's right. It cannot, in my view. It requires witnessing by those capable of recognizing authenticity. No duh. That is so true. Jung identified 3 essential types of relationships for the highly perceptive individual. Type 1, fellow individuated persons. Jung wrote, the individuated person recognizes another individuated person immediately. There is a quality of presence, an authenticity that cannot be fabricated. This is true. There's nothing fabricated about me and how I present myself. These connections often happen instantly and intensely. You recognize each other as members of what Jung called the conscious minority. These relationships are rare, but essential for psychological survival. With fellow individuated persons, you can be completely authentic without fear of overwhelming or threatening them. Type 2, those engaged in individuation. Jung observed that people actively engaged in their own individuation process, therapy, inner work, spiritual practice, can often handle superior perception without defensiveness. Absolutely. This is, again, why I feel like, having the channel on, and why I'm constantly asking folks who feel drawn to reach out because of this very thing right here. They may not possess it themselves, but they understand its value. Those who have begun to know themselves can bear to be known by others. Type 3, natural containers. Jung identified individuals who, while not possessing superior perception themselves, have what he called, quote, natural container function, the ability to hold psychological content without being overwhelmed by it. These might be mature individuals who have weathered significant life challenges. The recognition process Jung developed specific indicators for identifying safe relationships. It's interesting that he's using that word because Lisa said that I was a safe place to land, which is why she moved here, because she could feel it immediately when meeting me in person, that that is what would happen for her to be able to lay out all of her stuff and look at it in a safe place. That's very interesting that he's using that terminology as well. Jung developed specific indicators for identifying safe relationships. They ask genuine questions about your observations rather than immediately defending against them. They can acknowledge their own contradictions and limitations without shame. That is kind of where I'm at. I mean, I see myself very clearly. And now I can be very contradictory sometimes. And I would add to that, you got to be able to laugh at yourself as well, yeah, because that's something we do quite often around here. They demonstrate what Jung called, quote, psychological mindedness, interest in inner reality. They maintain emotional stability when confronted with uncomfortable truths. They show genuine curiosity about consciousness and growth. Gradual revelation protocol. Jung taught a careful process for revealing perceptive abilities. Number one, begin with small, gentle observations. Number two, notice their response pattern to feedback. Number three, access whether they become defensive or curious. Gradually increase depth based on their demonstrated capacity. Number four, no, wait a minute, I must have skipped something. Access whether they become defensive or curious. Okay, number four, gradually increase depth based on their demonstrated capacity. Number five, always frame insights as offerings rather than pronouncements. Yeah, the way I spoke was something that I saw very clearly that I needed to change. And I mostly only share things that have worked for me. This is how I've done it. But I always also say to folks, your individual mileage is absolutely going to vary because we are all so very unique. Jung emphasized the goal is not to find people who accept everything you see, but to find people who can engage with your perceptions as valuable contributions to understanding rather than threats to their self-image, which is so true. Because integrated superior perception serves both individual and collective development, that's what that guy who created human design said, that projectors are the guides for humanity in these next upcoming, what's coming next kind of thing. And I see that very clearly. Because integrated superior perception serves both individual and collective development, therefore, Jung viewed successful individuation as essential, not just for personal well-being, but for the evolution of human consciousness itself. I could not agree more. Jung wrote in The Undiscovered Self, the individual has always been the carrier of the living spirit, the one who brings about change in society. That's true. He believed that individuals who successfully integrate superior perception become what he called, quote, culture carriers, people who help consciousness evolve. The 4 stages of transformation. Stage 1, recognition without overwhelm. The first transformation occurs when you learn to acknowledge your perceptive abilities without being crushed by them. That's a big thing, because the way that most of us came up, especially if we had these as children, that's where a lot of my trauma stems from. And I can't imagine that I'm alone in that. And then, of course, it just continuing as as I became an adult. Okay, so Jung called this, quote, conscious acceptance of the superior function. The beginning of wisdom, he wrote this, beginning of wisdom is the recognition of what one actually is, not what one wishes to be or fears to be. Stage 2, integration without isolation. The second stage involves learning to use your perception constructively while maintaining meaningful relationships. That has been a bit difficult for me, and why I had to learn how to do this with people I had no history with. I couldn't do the kind of work that I needed to do with family members because of the dynamic, because of the historical dynamic between us. I wasn't capable of doing this work without becoming defensive or overly aggressive in the way I would think about things and say things. And the same for them. They couldn't hear what I needed to work through without them becoming defensive or overly aggressive, which is why most of us cannot do this kind of work with family members. It has to be with someone that we feel safe with, that we have no historical baggage with. The dynamics don't allow it. And it was me more so than any of them. I take full responsibility for all of that. And having now been able to do a lot of this work, I'm in no way finished with it. Don't make a mistake on that. Frees me up to be able to interact with family members whom I love dearly that I couldn't interact with before. My sister and I are actually going to have a conversation about just that right there. So, Jung, okay, so I'm going to back this up a little bit. Jung called this conscious acceptance of the superior function. He wrote, the beginning of wisdom is the recognition of what one actually is, not what one wishes to be or fears to be. Stage 2, integration without isolation. Second stage involves learning to use your perception constructively while maintaining meaningful relationships. Jung called this, quote, social individuation, becoming authentically yourself while remaining connected to others. Jung observed, individuated person does not withdraw from the world, but engages with it more consciously. Stage 3, service without sacrifice. The third transformation happens when your perception becomes a gift you offer rather than a burden you carry. Jung called this, quote, conscious participation, using your abilities in service of others without depleting yourself. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and then to offer that authentic self in service of the whole." I could not agree more. Stage 4, legacy without attachment. The final stage involves what Jung called, quote, transcendent function, using your perception to contribute to collective consciousness evolution without attachment to whether others recognize or accept your contributions, which could actually be part of the whole I just do the channel and it matters not to me what happens, because I know it is helpful for those who find it helpful, and it is there for them to take advantage of, and or not, as the case may be. Jung observed that he believed that individuals who successfully integrate superior perception serve a vital evolutionary function. They see what collective consciousness is not yet ready to acknowledge, helping to prepare humanity for necessary developmental steps. Jung wrote, "What is not brought to consciousness comes to us as fate." Highly perceptive individuals who learn integration help make unconscious contents conscious before they manifest destructively in collective behavior. I would agree with that. But Jung warned about specific pitfalls that can derail this transformation, because the path of integrating superior perception contains specific dangers. Therefore, Jung documented the most common ways individuals derail their own transformation process. Pitfall number 1, the inflation trap. Jung wrote extensively about psychological inflation. When individuals become identified with their superior function rather than integrating it consciously. In 2 essays on analytical psychology, he warned, the danger is that the ego identifies with the archetype, leading to an inflation that cuts the individual off from human relationships. Highly perceptive individuals often fall into what Jung called, quote, the prophet complex, believing they must save everyone from unconsciousness. Now, I feel like that's a real thing right there, and a trap that many light workers absolutely end up falling into. This leads to preaching, judgment, and eventual isolation. Yes. Jung observed, the moment one believes oneself to be the bearer of absolute truth, one has fallen into the trap of unconscious possession by the very forces one seeks to understand. I could not agree more. I have seen so much of that, and I see tinges of it in lots of folks. You know, it's like a stepping over that line kind of thing. Yeah, wow. Pitfall number 2. The withdrawal. Jung documented cases where the individuals used their superior perception to justify complete withdrawal from society. They convinced themselves that others were too unconscious to be worth engaging, which Jung recognized as spiritual superiority masquerading as wisdom. Jung wrote, quote, true individuation requires engagement with the unconscious world, not escape from it. I could not agree more. The hermit who withdraws from life has not transcended it, but has been defeated by it. End quote. That makes sense to me. Pitfall number 3. The helpers, Jung observed, Haiyung. So that's not Carl Jung, but somebody else called Jung. Observed that some highly perceptive individuals become addicted to being needed. They define themselves entirely through their ability to see and help others, losing contact with their own inner development. That is one of the reasons why I'm just really doing all my internal work out loud. That's all this ever has been for me. When perception becomes identity, the person disappears behind the function. This is not individuation, but its opposite, the sacrifice of personality to role. Pitfall number 4, the overwhelm return. Even successfully integrated individuals can regress during periods of stress, trauma, or major life transitions. I know I'm not fully integrated. I'm not successfully integrated, not anywhere near. But that's why I say it's a sliding scale for me. I could see on my own journey, which is why I'm so grateful to have these other beings in my life, right? And some of you are quickly becoming that for me as well. Even successfully integrated individuals can regress during periods of stress, trauma, or major life transitions. They stop maintaining their psychological boundaries and become flooded with others' unconscious contents again. I think I may have done that just recently, actually. Jung emphasized, quote, integration is not a permanent achievement. Too true, but a dynamic process requiring constant conscious attention. Oh, yes. The integration maintenance, Jung developed ongoing practices for maintaining healthy integration. Jung wrote, in the undiscovered self, the individual has always been the carrier of the living spirit, the one who brings about the change in society. He believed that people with superior perception serve as what he called consciousness pioneers, individuals whose psychological development precedes collective readiness. Historical pattern. Jung observed that throughout history, individuals with superior perception often appeared before collective consciousness was ready to integrate their insights. They served as advanced scouts for psychological territories that humanity would eventually need to explore. I think that's true too. Jung wrote, what appears in the individual first as psychological insight later manifests in the collective as cultural transformation. I think that's true. I had an experience recently, in December of 2024, where I was at a gathering and a young friend of my son's, young to me anyway, we were talking about consciousness, and I heard her say that consciousness is evolving, which is something that I always say. And I've known this person since she was in high school. And I was shocked to hear that coming out of her mouth. Now, She doesn't watch me. She doesn't have any, uh, to my knowledge, anything to do with, but even she could feel and knows, right, that there is consciousness is evolving on the planet. So I found that very interesting. So, what appears in the individual first as psychological insight later manifests itself in the collective as cultural transformation. The individual serves as a laboratory for consciousness experiments that will eventually benefit the whole. Modern manifestations. Jung believed that in the modern era, highly perceptive individuals might be sensing psychological patterns that explain collective behavior, environmental and social unsustainability before it becomes obvious, spiritual possibilities beyond current religious frameworks, technological implications that others haven't considered, collective shadow contents that need conscious integration. Jung's insight: the sensitive individual feels the collective problems first and most intensely. Their personal symptoms often reflect what the entire culture needs to address, which again, I'm being flashed the whole time I was ill. Wow, that's very interesting. Jung wrote, the individuated person serves the collective not by sacrificing their individuality, but by developing it so completely that it becomes a gift to the whole. The ultimate integration at the highest level of development. Jung observed individuals with superior perception hold their abilities lightly. And I think that's a very good description of what I think is most beneficial for me, anyway. Seeing clearly without attachment to others, which is sometimes easier said than done, trust me, especially when it's speaking on those we love, right? Accepting what they see, perceiving deeply without compulsion to fix everything they observe, which was tough and still sometimes is for me. Jung called this the transcendent function, the ability to serve consciousness evolution naturally, without forcing or preaching, simply by embodying more conscious ways of being. Remember Jung's Jung's patient from 1913, the introverted intuitive who came to him during his own psychological crisis. After 3 years of working with Jung's individuation process, her life transformed completely. She learned to distinguish between her own psychological contents and what she absorbed from others. She found work as a counselor where her differentiated perception helped troubled individuals. She built relationships with people who valued her insights rather than fearing them. Most importantly, she stopped experiencing her superior perception as a curse and began understanding it as what Jung called, quote, a gift requiring conscious development. Jung wrote about her transformation, quote, the patient learned not to see less, but to see more wisely. Not to perceive less deeply, but to engage more consciously with what she perceived. Her gift remained intact, but her relationship to it became integrated rather than overwhelming, which is what I feel like I'm in the process of doing. is I didn't even realize that's what I had up until just a few years ago when during some of the conscious conversations we were having on Conscious Conversation Central, I had actually said that my intuitive abilities were what I called more seamless. In other words, have the I didn't have guides. I didn't have those that I was consulting for information. I just knew a thing. And I really do think that's what this is for me, showing me. And because I am learning how to work with it, because now I know what I'm doing. I understand what it is that is happening to me, what it is, and how to work with it. So this is very helpful, and may be helpful to you as well. And I would love to hear from those of you who have stuck through this entire reading here. Um, Her gift remained intact, but her relationship to it became integrated rather than overwhelming. This represents Jung's most dangerous discovery, that some individuals are born with consciousness that exceeds collective readiness, and this advanced perception will either destroy them through isolation and overwhelm or transform them into exactly what humanity needs for its psychological evolution. Your superior perception isn't a malfunction in your psychological makeup. It's an advanced feature of consciousness development. You're not broken because you see everything others miss. You're psychologically ahead of your time. I think that's true. The question isn't whether you should suppress your perception to fit in with collective unconsciousness. The question is whether you'll develop the individuation skills necessary to integrate your perception consciously. Jung's individuated method offers a path from dangerous isolation to conscious service, from overwhelming perception to integrated wisdom, from psychological curse to evolutionary contribution. And I would say that again, had it not been for the arrival of Lisa Flamino Rush and the ensuing others that came as a result of that, and now Lisa's name just popped up on my phone. That is so delicious. I can't even stand it. She just sent me a private message. She doesn't even know what I'm doing here. She's not even home. And yet she feels me. Now, I'm telling you, oh my word. That is so good. Jung's individuation method offers a path from dangerous isolation to conscious service, from overwhelming perception to integrated wisdom, from psychological curse to evolutionary contribution. You were born to see everything, not to suffer in silence, but to serve consciousness evolution. I do know that's true. The world needs your insights. I have been told that by more than one. But it needs them delivered with the integration, wisdom, and strategic awareness that transform dangerous perception into cultural medicine. Your gift is not your burden. Your unconscious relationship to your gift is your burden. I think that's a true statement right there. Learn to integrate it consciously, and you become exactly what Jung believed highly perceptive individuals were meant to be. Consciousness pioneers, preparing humanity for psychological development that is inevitable, but not yet obvious. That is so true. Jung's most dangerous discovery wasn't that some people see everything. It's that most people who see everything never learn to use what they see wisely. Danger isn't in the perception itself, but in failing to develop conscious relationship with extraordinary abilities. You are not too much for this world. You are exactly what consciousness evolution requires. Once you learn to wield your perception as consciously as Jung learned to wield his, danger of seeing everything isn't that you see too much, it's that you might never learn to see with the integration and wisdom your gifts demand. If you recognize yourself in Jung's description of the highly perceptive individual, you are part of a rare psychological type that Jung, I want to cry at this, believed essential consciousness evolution. I feel like that's true. And she just sent me something that said, this seems to corroborate. And if you are one of these beings where you suspect that you are, please reach out. Don't sit in isolation. Consciousconversationscentral@gmail.com is how you reach out to me. I don't have I don't charge for stuff. That's not what any of this is about for me. It is about the evolution of consciousness. My God. For myself and for the all. And if you are sitting there isolated because you have been told you're too much, don't sit there alone. Reach out. Let's have a conversation. In your email, give me a couple of days of the week and times of day that it works best for you. Don't forget to include your time zone, and we will set up a conversation in Zoom. And let's see if there's anything that I could offer you from my experience. Because I know what it's like to feel isolated, seeing things others can't or don't, or aren't interested in learning or feeling or seeing or any of that. And it can be very overwhelming. Wow. So the last part of it said here is via surreal mind, when one sees clearly what others cannot or will refuse to see, one becomes a mirror that society cannot bear to look into. That's true. And it came very close to destroying me. Don't sit there and allow it to destroy you. Wow. I want to thank Amber Fields for following through on her nudge and sending this to me again because it had already come into my field and I had been nudged, but I allowed it to escape out of my consciousness. And I would not have done this had she not followed through with her nudge to send it to me again. And that's what happens when the universe really wants me to do something. Wow. Until we meet again, my friends, be well. I hope you will subscribe both to New Light Streaming Love and to Sassy Seer Sheila, both channels, because you never know where I'm going to go live or with whom at any given moment. And by being subscribed in both places, you won't miss anything. And so I love you guys so much for tuning in. Until next time, be well.